Welcome to Jackson Lewis's podcast, We Get Work. Our podcast identifies issues that influence and impact the workplace and its continuing evolution, and helps answer the question on every employer's mind: how will my business be impacted? Employees requesting accommodations in the life sciences industry are becoming far more creative. On this episode of We Get Work, we discuss this growing trend and how employers can effectively engage in the interactive process. Our hosts today are Peggy Strange, co-leader of the Life Sciences Group, and Patty Pryor, a core team member of the firm's Disability, Leave, and Health Management Group, and principals, respectively, in the Hartford and Cincinnati offices of Jackson Lewis. Peggy and Patty, the question on everyone's mind today is: what novel types of accommodation requests are life sciences employers encountering? And how does that impact my business?
Good afternoon, Patty. So nice of you to take time out of your busy schedule to chat today. So you are so often one of my lifelines for all things accommodation related. And I am so excited to pick your brain today on accommodation requests in the life science industry. So let me start with a basic question. Is it me or our clients receiving, particularly in the life science industry, just a large increase in the amount of accommodation requests, the creativity around those requests? Are you seeing some boosts in those requests?
I think it's definitely you, Peggy. Absolutely. I'm just kidding. We're certainly seeing an accommodation increase. In fact, I've heard it being called that we're now an accommodation nation, and that we're currently seeing an accommodation generation. All those individuals who've been used to being catered to and having their needs taken care of. And of course, COVID didn't help. Many of us did things differently, and people got used to that. And it changed the perspective on what might be reasonable or what might work as an accommodation.
So what are some of the more common accommodation requests you're seeing in our accommodation nation? I like that. I hadn't heard that.
It's almost like, what aren't we seeing, right? Certainly work from home remains in high demand, and you definitely got to blame that on COVID. Being able to work, and I kind of put work in quotes, right? While still being able to put the load of laundry in, get the kids off the school bus, start dinner, is still enticing to a lot of folks. And then we see a lot of requests now for stress-free work. That's kind of high on the list. And lots of requests for that new supervisor, less stress, or my favorite, an environment that doesn't trigger me. And of course, time off, particularly let me call off whenever I want to without penalty. That's another one of my favorites. Am I sounding jaded?
Sounds like you're getting a lot of requests. Let's put it that way. And some of them I know, time off, the intermittent leave for medical treatment. It's you're just working around so many different demands today. So let me give you, an example. Let's say you have, life science, you have researchers. And let's say you've got a researcher who's supposed to be in the office, collaborating with her colleagues, sitting next to them. I know they don't use test tubes anymore, but picture, I'm going to show you, I tried this. Oh, let me try that. Working in teams, meeting in teams. It's a really, really in-person, energetic, engaged environment. You get a medical note that says, and I'll quote one in case I've seen it. It would be better for their health if this person could work remotely. What should the client do at that point?
Yeah. So a couple of things there. First, you have the question of, is it really necessary or just a preference, right? Lots of things would be better for me. It would be better for me if I just got paid and didn't have to work. It would be better for me if I didn't have any stress. That's the same, I think, for everyone. But we're starting to see a lot of notes like that I'd say are a little bit less definitive. And of course, we know that oftentimes these notes are just regurgitations of whatever the employee is asking the doctor to say. So sometimes we may want to ask for more information or clarification on that note. But keep in mind, we saw a recent decision where the court stated that the law doesn't require that it necessarily be necessary, and that it just needs to be reasonable. So depending on your jurisdiction, it may not matter if it's needed or not. Which brings me to so first you got to consider, do we push back on that note? Do we get more clarification? But regardless of that content of the note, you're going to want to assess whether work in person is really necessary to perform the essential functions of the job. And what evidence do you have to show that? You want to look at your job descriptions, your performance reviews, how the job's been performed. If it was performed remotely during COVID, we should have good evidence of what didn't work. And that's going to be a really important part, is if it has been performed remotely, why didn't it work? We should be able to articulate the reason. And most importantly, regardless of what you decide on the essential nature of the in-person work, it's going to be important to engage in that interactive process. Accommodation cases rise or fall most often on the quality of that interactive process.
And talking about that interactive process, one of the things with somebody who wants to work at home, would it be reasonable to say, hey, we can't do this all the time, but maybe a couple of days a week you work at home?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's certainly something you want to consider and offer, right? I mean, so much of that interactive process is trying to get to that middle ground of what will work for them and still work for the company.
Perfect. So speaking of back to work, and I've gotten this question a number of times. Life science clients do not need to accommodate issues related to commute time, right? So if I commute to work in the morning, that's on me. I have to get myself to work. And if I say, oh, well, I need to limit my commute to daylight hours because of a problem with my eyesight. And it's the shortest day of the year. I'm here in New England. Those days are pretty short. So I'm going to probably not be able to get in till 8:30 and, probably given my hour and a half commute, probably leave somewhere around 3.
Is that your normal work schedule there, Peggy?
I was wondering if you'd catch on.
No, it's so funny. We are seeing so many of those type of requests, and I call those requests kind of the next best thing. And it's almost well, if I can't get remote work, which is what I really want, then I'll ask for this. And maybe they'll get tired of that and eventually let me work remotely. It's funny how that all kind of connects together. But as a result, we are seeing a lot more commuting requests. And years ago, we would confidently say employers don't have an obligation to accommodate issues outside of the workplace. And how an employee gets to work is one of those. And that's still true to some extent, but what we've seen is a number of cases in recent years that have required accommodations to some degree on some commuting issues. So, for example, with respect to your question, there was a decision out of the Seventh Circuit, I think it was the Seventh Circuit, that said an employer may have to accommodate things within their control, which in this case would be the schedule. So the employer may have to consider whether the schedule could be changed without undue hardship.
You maybe require me to work at home a little when I get there after my 4.5 hour day.
That's right.
But it's all the process, right? If I can't get in, let's try to work it through. So, let's say that we've got sales representatives and they often have fleet cars, they have lease cars. They're calling all day. There's no question. They're driving from place to place and they have a doctor's note that says, something like, due to back pain, Peggy needs a larger car. I'd like a Suburban or larger.
Yeah. They can ask for just about anything they want. One thing to keep in mind, and I always tell this with employers and supervisors when I train them, even if the employer thinks something is a ridiculous request, they need to engage in that interactive process. So, for example, if the employee requested, hey, it'd be better for me if I had a Porsche, you still want to engage in that interactive process to find out the why. And so here with the bigger car, how will it help? Right? Mm-hmm. In this situation, if we're already providing the car to the individual and you have larger size cars available, it's certainly possible it might be a reasonable accommodation. But sometimes finding out how does it actually help them can help identify a better or a cheaper accommodation. Would a cushion help? Would having a therapist or someone else kind of assess the best way to adjust the seat of the current car to help? So you want to go into that, again, that interactive process, and you want to do that thinking anything's possible. Open mind, right? Keep that open mind and then drill down to what can we find that meets the employee's needs and still works for the company with the least burden.
Well, and even the cases you've suggested, it sounds like the open mind is the key to approach it with not how we can't do this, no way, no how, but hey, you're a good employee, you're a valued employee. Not everyone's trying to get away with things. We're going to help you, and we're going to
Absolutely.
see what we can do.
Right.
So, what if you have a sales representative who just can't drive? So they make sales calls and they can't drive, and maybe it's a medical condition, maybe it's a drunken driving arrest over the weekend. Um, Driving is clearly an essential function, right? They have to drive to their places.
Well, it's a good question. Is it an essential function? Sometimes we think of driving as an essential function, but it really is, you think through, is it really in today's world? Is it really? Or do they just need to get to client A and client B? In which case, could they use public transportation or an Uber or a car service? So, if it's not actually the driving, they're not delivering something, their job isn't to Uber someone else, um, then it's more about how they get there. They just need to get there. And can they do that by alternative means, which we might need to think about and consider accommodating?
That's an excellent advice because we do see this again. No, they have to drive, and you're right. There's lots of options. Somebody can't drive, you'll see me people out on their bikes heading off to work. So a lot of our clients are startups. Welcome to life science, and they're moving fast. So, uh, and I know you've worked in life science, you've worked with startups. The pace is very, very fast because that's how you're a success. That's who leads the pack, people who can get things done quickly, and they're very talented groups of people who come together and make things happen. So a request comes in for an intermittent leave to a fast moving startup. An employee needs to come in late and leave early to manage stress. And do you know this call from the client? Startups are just moving too fast to accommodate this. Is that a defense?
Well, I guess even before you get to the ADA and the accommodation thing, what about FMLA? Are they eligible for that?
No, they actually took a full maternity leave earlier in the year. So the company's already a little like we can't do more. Even though they were able to accommodate an entire maternity leave. But anyways.
Yeah. No, so and that's can be incredibly frustrating. So first and foremost, you want to remind clients and I think particularly in those startup businesses that sometimes these requests are going to be frustrating. And the worst thing you can do is have your supervisors or managers make negative comments about that, either live or in emails or texts or anything else. So first and foremost, some of this is an unfortunate, sometimes and burdensome, sometimes feel on the company, but it's the law, it's required. And at the end of the day, it is, I think you mentioned earlier, designed to help you keep good, strong employees. And we all at times need that little extra help or that accommodation. So in this case, they still may need to, and they're going to need to assess, whether or not they have FMLA, and then whether or not they have any kind of other state or other required leaves like paid sick leave that you might have to provide, even for those kind of shortened days type things. And then you have to look at, do we need to accommodate them? Intermittent leave can be a reasonable accommodation. These shortened days, and we're seeing lots more of these of, I can only work this number of hours a day. We're seeing a lot of that, and it depends on what the impact is. How does it make others work harder or longer? How does it impact the business or the customers? The more planned the leave is, so in this case where they're not going to come in until this hour and they're going to leave at that hour, that's generally a little easier to accommodate than the individual whose leave is kind of that sporadic, unpredictable. You never know if they're going to show up or when they're going to show up. Those are a little easier to push back on the accommodation because it becomes an undue hardship quicker, right? We don't have to accommodate the person that you never know when they're going to show up.
All right. And are there any special considerations for accommodating claims related to like interpersonal issues at work? Look, the supervisor just we don't get along, and just happens. It's all on them, and I can't take it anymore. I can't take the stress. So I would like my supervisor to communicate only by email with me. Do you have to accommodate me?
Maybe. Those issues are also becoming more common, and often, you have to think about too. Does it come with an allegation of harassment that we need to deal with? But I'm hearing a lot. My supervisor's triggering me. My supervisor, I don't like the in-person communications. You certainly might need to accommodate how the supervisor manages, how the communications work. But the question always comes up of, do you have to accommodate the request for a new supervisor? And generally speaking, over the years, it's been pretty clear that no one's entitled to what we call a bossectomy, where you eliminate that boss. But caution there was a recent case that said that that may not always be the case. And the important thing is making sure you've engaged in that interactive process, even though the request might be like, what, well, how can we only communicate by email? How can we, change the boss? You need to engage in that interactive process.
Right. And lab workers, a lab worker, they've got special requirements. They have to wear a respirator, whatever the requirement is. They have a doctor's note saying they cannot do it.
Yeah, I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but you need to find out the why, right? Engage in that interactive process and determine what is it about the respirator that they can't use? Are there alternatives that might work? And then, of course, assess, is that respirator really required for the job? And is it an undue hardship or a violation of law not to require it? If it's required and there's no way to accommodate it safely, don't forget to consider whether transfer to another position might be appropriate.
All right. So I often get these calls, accommodation, what are we going to do? And I'll ask about their process. And they don't have one. They may have like a little piece of paper that says we accommodate. That's our process. So should life science clients in particular start developing accommodation processes, maybe forms, procedures, or is that too regimented because you need like the interactive process? And then if we're going to develop processes, what do we do about religious accommodation requests that are now, more akin or closer to disability? So should we have processes or no process?
Yeah, no, I like some process. So you want to have a policy telling employees how to request an accommodation. And generally, and one of the important things I like having them make that request to a central place, to HR, rather than to a supervisor, to help reduce that likelihood that the supervisor misses the request or doesn't understand it as a request for accommodation. So I like having an accommodation form that the employee can complete. But again, even if they don't, you still may have to accommodate. And that form is likely going to be different for a disability accommodation versus a religious accommodation. It might be a different form, and different for the pregnancy or PWFA accommodations. So you kind of want a combination of that. And then in terms of, sometimes I see employers that will keep the exact same requests going out to the doctors, and sometimes you need to make sure that those change. So for example, I like to be much more directed. If I'm going to send a request to the doctor to get support for the accommodation request, I like sometimes to be a little more directed based on what the employee is requesting. Remember, it's an individualized process. No two accommodation requests are the same. And as each individual is different and how their medical condition impacts them can also be different, and the impact it has on work may be different. So having some flexibility in that process with the interactive process and the communications to the healthcare providers can be extremely helpful in identifying that best course forward. So yes, have some policies. Yes, have some process. Yes, train your managers so they know to, when they hear something, to direct it to HR, and encourage employees to bring the request directly to HR. And then it's an interactive process.
Perfect. Well, Patty, thank you very much. I think we're going to be more interactive and think more creatively going forward. Thank you so much for your time.
No problem.
Thank you for listening to Jackson Lewis's podcast, We Get Work. Focused solely on workplace issues, it is our job to help employers develop proactive strategies, strong policies, and business-oriented solutions to cultivate a workforce that is engaged and stable. Please tune into our next program, where we will continue to tell you not only what's legal, but what is effective. We Get Work is available to stream and subscribe on your streaming platform of choice, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. For more information on today's topic, our presenters, and other Jackson Lewis resources, visit jacksonlewis.com. As a reminder, this material is provided for informational purposes only. It is not intended to constitute legal advice, nor does it create a client-lawyer relationship between Jackson Lewis and any recipient.